Hello, everyone. I am Tyler from Sideline Single here with Andrew as well. We got a lot to talk about, some takeaways from the first week of NFL action, as well as some stock up, stock downs from the college game, and some teams that impressed and disappointed from week one, and each give our takes on that. But first, we're going to start off with our takeaways for week one. A lot happened, a lot has changed in the NFL, and we finally got our first look at all these teams this weekend. So, Andrew, you want to give me your week one takeaways?
Yeah, so starting off, it will be a NFC East team. They got to play in Sao Paulo, Brazil against the Green Bay Packers. They came away with a win, but my takeaway from the Philadelphia Eagles is that the offense looks good as Saquon Barkley will be the main production guy this season. Jalen Hurts does not look that good. Obviously, they struggled, both teams, honestly, with the conditions of the field. A lot of players slipping both offensively and defensively. Jordan Love went down with an MCL sprain, which is obviously a concern. But Saquon Barkley had a hell of a game. He had 24 carries for 109 yards and three total touchdowns. And when I know. Heartbreaking watching as a Giants fan, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
looking at the Eagles' offense, they had some times where they passed the ball well. Obviously, Devontae Smith had some pretty good receptions. He had some good receiving yards, but Saquon was really that powerhouse of that offense. If they needed a spark plug, he was always there to break off a big run. He had some good receiving plays too. But overall, Jalen Hurts really struggled. I don't know if it was just the communication with the center. Obviously, there was a fumble because of a miscommunication between the two. But he had some questionable decisions. There was a few plays, especially one in the red zone that could have been a pick six that Jair Alexander just happened to drop. But I was not impressed with Jalen Hurts. So going forward this season, especially early, I really think that they're going to, hammer with Saquon Barkley if they want to produce and score a lot of touchdowns. My second is kind of a hot take. I talked a little bit about it on TikTok earlier in the week, but I think the Bengals might struggle this season. I had them pinned to win the AFC North, but after week one, they did not look good. Obviously, they did not have T. Higgins, who's their wide receiver too, and Jamar Chase played, but he had food poisoning apparently, and he's still in his contract holdouts, but they did nothing on offense. Uh, you know, Joe Burrow went 21 for 29 for 164 total yards. That's it. Zero touchdown passes, zero interceptions. There was a lot of times where it looked like he was still messing with his wrist, which he had issues with towards the end of last season and didn't play. But, if they're going to have T. Higgins, who's going to be dealing with a nagging hamstring injury, they couldn't produce without him. And Jamar Chase got locked up. I mean, Christian Gonzalez is a great young DB. He's one of my favorite of the younger DBs. Obviously, his rookie year got cut short last year with a labrum injury, but Jamar Chase is supposed to be one of the top receivers in the league. So you have to be able to beat top DBs, and he didn't. And I think looking at it right now, Patriots are probably one of your easier games on the schedule. And if you can't move the ball against them, you're really not going to have success in the North this year.
They actually they're playing the Chiefs this week, so they got to get it figured out pretty freaking fast if they're
Exactly.
going to stand a chance.
Yeah, like Trent McDuffie's probably going to be on Jamar Chase. And if he couldn't do it against Gonzalez, there's a good chance he won't do it against McDuffie too. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see. Hopefully Burrow's healthy. Like I said, he was kind of messing with his wrist a lot. But yeah, so I think the Bengals are potentially in trouble. Obviously, it's week one, so this is probably just an overreaction. But moving on to my final takeaway, this one kind of pains me a little, but the Las Vegas Raiders, they're not going to be competitive this year. I think we can take that away from just this week one matchup against the Chargers. I'm not pulling a lot of stats here, but their offense couldn't do anything. Gardner Minshew couldn't get the ball moving. Devontae did what he could. Jacoby Myers did what he could, but they weren't getting open. The run game, it was a crazy play for their touchdown to Alexander Madison to start off the game. But overall, the Raiders just offensively had nothing going for them. And defensively, they got shut down. I mean, Joe Alt had 10 reps against Max Crosby, who you have as a defensive player of the year this year.
Yeah.
As a Raiders fan, I think Max Crosby is one of the best edge rushers in the game. He didn't even get to Herbert. Christian Wilkins had a couple good plays, but overall, the D line, which is supposed to be the key part of the Raiders defense, struggled against honestly not that great of an offensive line in Los Angeles. So I think, from top to bottom, offense and defense, they struggled. Even the special teams, they struggled. Daniel Carlson missed a field goal, which could have put them in a lot better of a situation down the stretch. So, really disappointing to watch the Raiders. And I think it's pretty obvious to tell that they're not going to be a competitive team this year. Those are my three takeaways. But what are your three takeaways from week one?
So first, before I get into that, I want to touch on the Raiders a little bit with two things that I saw or have heard. First one being you talked about the special teams a little bit, but Antonio Pierce punting on the 41 of the Chargers on 4th and 1, 7 minutes left in the game, you're down a touchdown. You punt? Are you kidding me? That ended the game right there. That literally ended the game. And then the other thing that I'm hearing is that a lot of players assumed that Aiden O'Connell was going to be the starting quarterback. Devontae was behind him. Antonio Pierce, when he got the job, was fully behind him. So I wonder what's going on in that locker room if they're not fully behind Gardner Minshew, because that would be a big deal. And Aiden O'Connell, you know, he's young. He could still be the quarterback for this team. So that's going to be something to watch down the stretch. Obviously, you're paying attention to it as a Raiders fan. And in terms of the D line, I get you with that one. I feel your pain. The Giants, nothing. I'll get to that later. But anyway, my takeaways. I got one that has nothing to do with the team. The new kickoff rules have failed their purpose. I think it's obvious just from watching 1 week and through the preseason. Even with the adoption of the old XFL 1.0 in 2019, their kickoff formation, there's still too many touchbacks and teams just aren't returning the ball. In the first 15 games of the 2024 season, only 63.5% of the kickoffs have gone for touchbacks without returns. That's a decline in touchbacks from last year by 8%. But it's really not doing anything. If you notice, most of the kickers are just drilling it out of the end zone like they usually do. So what are they got to do? Move back the kickoff line? What are they going to do next? I really feel like if you're going to make a change this drastic to where like there's no more onside kicks and you do this new formation, it's got to be worth it. And that 8% isn't cutting it. Obviously, we'll see. But I really think it sucks, honestly. Like just full out. I'd rather it just be the normal kickoff and maybe move it back 10 yards, or maybe have the kicker stand 10 yards behind the kickoff team and still have the same formation. But we'll see what they do. I don't really see this lasting for very long, though, if it doesn't actually prove that there'll be more returns from it. But we will see. My second one, Mike Evans is one of the most underrated wide receivers in NFL history. How many times does he have to have an amazing game, absolutely moss somebody, make every single catch, and we don't give him the respect? Because I think if you ask most NFL fans, average or fully involved, if you ask them to list their top 5 wide receivers in the NFL, Mike Evans probably isn't on a majority of those lists, which is ridiculous. The man has had 1,000 yards receiving every single year. We're going on a decade now where he's had 1,000 yards every single year. You think about the quarterback situations he's had, besides Tom Brady for a couple of years. Baker Mayfield is the best quarterback that he's played with. And yes, Baker has turned it on since he's gotten to Tampa Bay, but that's saying something. Like he's never played with an amazing quarterback besides, like I said, Tom Brady at the end of his career, the GOAT, but not what he was in New England, obviously. But amazing. He made the Commanders secondary look silly, and he catches everything. He had 5 catches for 61 yards, 2 touchdowns, including one touchdown down the left sideline over Mike Sandstro. That was just ridiculous, just full on hand catches the football into the end zone. Amazing. Yeah, so that's all I gotta say. Mike Evans, put some respect on his name. He doesn't get the respect in fantasy. He doesn't get the respect in just rankings in general. So we need to give this guy his props, and I could easily see him being a first ballot Hall of Famer once he hangs the cleats up and retires. But he is amazing. Yeah. So moving on to my third takeaway here, kind of bounces off Andrew's take on the Bengals being down, is that I think the Patriots aren't going to be a pushover this year. I think that was pretty clear. The entire country picked the Bengals this weekend without any second guessing. No one thought, oh, maybe the Patriots win. No. Everyone was on the Bengals. All the money in the game was on the Bengals in terms of bets. No one thought the Patriots were going to even hold up, let alone win the game outright. Gerard Mayo and the boys held it down, and they stunned a Bengals team that was probably overlooking them. Yes, they didn't have T. Higgins, and yes, Jamar Chase only practiced a week, but still, no excuse for a team that's aspirations are the Super Bowl, as the Bengals are. The Patriots, young team, they're putting it together. Jacoby Brissett, if he manages to not turn the ball over, this team could be very dangerous. Not making the playoffs or anything like that, but a team that is tough on a week to week basis. Like the AFC East may be the toughest division in football this year if the Patriots are better than we've expected. The Jets, the Dolphins, and the Bills cannot take those games for granted. The Patriots are going to be good. The offense isn't flashy, but I believe that the run game is going to be something that they hang their hats on. And like I said, if Jacoby Brissett just eliminates some mistakes for the most part, then they should be pretty good. And obviously the defense was extremely impressive, holding a Bengals offense that was top when Joe Burrow is healthy to only 10 points, including a crazy play on Tanner Hudson as he's about to cross the goal line, punching the ball out. But I think that the most impressive part of the Patriots defense is that it's not just one player that's making all these plays. It's coming from everywhere. Christian Gonzalez locking down Jamar Chase. Jabril Peppers, big hits in the open field. The D line's getting after it. They just traded Matthew Judon, and they're still getting pressure. So I'm really seeing a lot of great things from the Patriots. And if I'm a Patriots fan, obviously I'm spoiled by the winning. But they're building to something. They're actually building to something, and I find it funny. As a Giants fan, I'll get into it. But the Patriots have turned it around in 3 years. They looked horrible, horrible the last couple of years, and then they turn it around. And I'm just wondering to myself, like, how come the New York Giants can't do this? A bunch of teams are doing this where they kind of retool and at least show some promise, which the Giants aren't doing. But like I said, I'll have my rant later on. So those are my three takeaways. New kickoff rule sucks. Mike Evans is amazing, and the Patriots are not going to be a pushover this year. So, I mean, there was a lot to take away, but they're my opinions that stood out to me the most
Yeah,
there.
it's really funny too because talking about the kickoff rule, I was watching the games with my dad this weekend and I had been hyping up, the new kickoff. It's going to be exciting, and he was the same way. He was watching, he goes, "I thought you said this was going to be exciting. It's still all touchbacks." And it's really interesting to see. You made some good points about potentially moving the line back, but I think the thing that we have to remember is the main reason they're implementing it is for the safety of the players. Kickoff is one of the highest productions of concussions in the NFL. And obviously, over the last decade or so, concussions have been a big ticket issue in terms of NFL and player safety. There's new protocols, obviously they were sued way, way back about, concussions and the way that people report concussion symptoms now. It's completely changed. So I think while it's been disappointing to see, obviously you said only it's an 8% difference between touchbacks from last year to this year so far. I think we have to remember that the health and safety of the players was the main reason why they changed it. So I personally think it's still a good thing. I'm just hoping it gets more dynamic as the season goes on. But yeah, looking forward now to college, our weekly kind of staple of stock up and stock down. It was another exhilarating week of college football games, some really nail biter games, some big upsets, and some almost upsets. So, looking through the entirety of the college football, who were your big stock up players?
So there was plenty to choose from. I really wanted to go Nico from Tennessee. He was amazing in that game. Won me a lot of money with Tennessee there blowing out NC State. But I'm gonna go stock up the Southeastern Conference as a whole. Six of the top 10 teams are from the SEC in this week's AP poll. I feel that this conference has the Big Ten in the rear view a little bit, and the ACC was left on the other side of the country. I really feel like the ACC is no longer there. It's the Big Ten and the SEC, and I really think the SEC, it's like Big Ten here, SEC there. Um, you know, Tennessee, who might be the fifth best team in the SEC, just beat NC State, who's probably the third best team in the ACC, by 40 points. And if you watch that game, talent wise, physicality wise, just execution, it was even further apart than the score suggests. Tennessee was just outmatching them at every level. Texas goes into Ann Arbor, absolutely dismantles the reigning national champs. I really felt like it really didn't take much. Like Quinn Ewers and the guys really just handled it from the beginning. They looked over a match offensively and defensively. I'm talking about Michigan here. Their offense sputtered against that defense, and the defense, who's supposed to be, stout, didn't really put up much resistance. Yeah, Texas had a couple of penalties that really cost them, but otherwise, I think it was pretty easy for them to move the ball down the field, which is not what I expected. Obviously, week one, Georgia dismantles Clemson. That was kind of expected, but I mean, the list goes on. I really feel like a game that we could watch this coming weekend, Missouri versus Boston College. They're going to Missouri. Missouri's a 17-point favorite. That's a ranked versus ranked matchup. That's unreal. That is unreal. And that is why, the SEC has just been dominant to that. The top tier of the conference, probably like teams like Texas, Georgia, Ole Miss, Bama, and Tennessee, I think would probably make every other conference's title game. I think, if not win it, if not be at the top. Like what I'm saying here is that if you put Ole Miss in the Big Ten, I think they would be in the top four teams there. Like at the end of the season, if they played a Big Ten schedule, and obviously that's not factoring in the cold and what have you and whatever. But that's really different. So as a whole, the SEC stock up for me. My other one, I touched on it a little bit. Quinn Ewers, quarterback out of Texas. He was amazing in Ann Arbor, completely unfazed. He went 24 for 36, 246 yards and three touchdowns against a well-respected Michigan Wolverines defense. He is now the front runner for the Heisman. I know that changes on a week-to-week basis, where I was just like last week, oh, Travis Hunter, give him the Heisman, but Quinn Ewers, great, great performance in a huge game for them. He's got 506 yards and six touchdowns through two games. They're also going to play Georgia, which is going to be a huge game for him. But I'm really loving Quinn Ewers. I'm fully on the tank for Ewers train as a Giants fan. So Quinn Ewers and the SEC are definitely my two stock ups. So for you, what were your stock ups from college football week 2?
Yeah, and to start, the first guy easily could have been one of our stock ups for week 1 as well. But I wanted to wait a little bit because he had a tough game this week and I wanted to see how he'd perform. But it's Ashton Jeanty from Boise State. What a running back he is. Against Oregon, again, really good defensive team. Jabbar Muhammad and a lot of guys in the secondary coming in. They have a stout D line, almost similar to last season. And wow, what a game he had. 25 carries, 192 rushing yards, and three total touchdowns. And it was a nail biter, heartbreaking loss against Oregon at Autzen. So far this season, he has 45 carries, 459 rushing yards, and nine total touchdowns. And we're only in week 2. He's a group of 5 player, but he's a front runner for the Heisman too. I know he's not the front runner right now. Obviously, it's Quinn Ewers, but I think he was third in Heisman odds at the end of last week. And he is an elusive player. If you talk about a Swiss Army knife as a running back, especially in college right now, it's Ashton Jeanty. He is the number one running back in college football right now, and he should be the number one running back off of the board come April for the NFL draft. He can get into open field. He can burst away with his speed. He can make a guy miss. He can run through a guy too. He has every tool that he needs to be successful in both college and the NFL. And I think he's continuing to show why. And this is a guy we could potentially see him at 1,000 yards rushing at like week 7.
Yeah.
And we could see 20, 25 rushing touchdowns out of him this season. And if he can continue to put up the production numbers that he's put through the first 2 weeks, and honestly, in a Mountain West schedule, it's possible. It really is possible. He could win the Heisman this year, and I wouldn't be upset if he continues to play like he has. But what a running back. Boise State's found their guy to kind of carry them through the season, potentially be a group of 5 contender for the automatic bid in the playoffs. But yeah, Ashton Jeanty has to be the biggest stock up of the week. My second one, it's a guy that I put in my top 5 quarterbacks list on TikTok. It's Dylan Raiola out of Nebraska. And yes, again, like I said in our TikTok that I posted, he may not have the most flashy stats, but from watching him in week 1 against UTEP and then week 2 against a really popular Colorado team, he looks like a veteran quarterback for college, and he's a true freshman. People give him flack. Oh, he's trying to copy Pat Mahomes in his pregame, the way he looks, the way he plays, but he looks like he's been a seasoned college quarterback. There's not a lot of throws when you watch him play that looks like, oh, yep, that's a true freshman starting. He just has this poise around him that's so impressive to watch. And like I said, Colorado has a lot of hype around them. So it's not the easiest game, whether or not they're that talented or not. There's, constant debate about that. But still, when you play Colorado, it's not an easy game. And I really think that Matt Rule's found his quarterback for the future. And it's been fun, really, really fun to watch. He went 23 for 30 for 185 passing yards and a touchdown against Colorado. But the offense was firing on all cylinders. And there was a couple throws against UTEP where he really did a good job of baiting in linebackers by stepping up into pressure, which allowed crossing routes to open up. And, obviously it didn't lead to a touchdown, but if you talk about producing and keeping drives alive, having a true freshman who's able to do that is really, really impressive. And I want to continue to see how he does in the Big Ten this year. There's going to be a lot of tough games on their schedule, so it's not going to be a cakewalk. But as a true freshman, I want to see how he develops in a tough schedule. But he was my biggest stock up outside of Ashton Genty for this week. Um,
So
yeah,
why wouldn't you want to emulate Pat Mahomes? I like everyone's giving him flack for that, but like why wouldn't you want to be like Pat Mahomes? He's the best quarterback on the planet right now. So I don't understand all that.
yeah,
He
and
could
it's
do
been like that.
all he wants.
It's been like that since training camp. Obviously, there was a video of him pulling up to his first practice, and he had, the headband, the glasses, looked just like Mahomes, and his pregame ritual's the same. Is it a little corny? Yeah, I
Yeah.
would say it is. But at the end of the day, if he's getting fired up and he's playing with confidence, who cares what he looks like and what he does for his ritual? Yeah, he's been impressive so far. So that's all I care about.
Yeah, definitely.
Exactly. Now, moving on to a slightly more disappointing note, who are your two stock downs for this week?
So I went with two quarterbacks, two teams that, going into the weekend had high hopes and coming out of it, it's nightmare scenario for both of them. My first one's going to be Riley Leonard out of Notre Dame. What the hell happened for them? Touchdown Jesus could not save them this game. They lost 16-14 to an NIU club who really played their best game, but as a Notre Dame fan, you gotta, if you're gonna point the finger besides Marcus Freeman, it's got to go to Riley Leonard. This guy just went in to Texas A&M, made plays like specifically on third down and fourth down that end up winning you that game. Then he comes into a home game against NIU, a game that you expect to win by 30 points, and just puts up some terrible numbers. He went 20 for 32, which isn't bad, 163 yards, but the two picks really killed them. And a lot of people are pointing the finger to their playmakers, like, oh, Riley Leonard's good, but the wide receivers, the tight ends, the running backs aren't doing their job. But I don't really see that. I really see that Leonard is kind of struggling. He kind of was against Texas A&M, but they won the game, so it wasn't going to be talked about as much. But I also feel that it's a quarterback's responsibility to make his playmakers look good. The playmaker isn't anything without the quarterback getting the ball in your hands. So it's not like every single big play was a drop or something. There were drops scattered in and they were costly. But I would have liked to see a little bit more out of him, especially running the ball. He had 11 carries for 16 yards and a touchdown. But 11 carries for 16 yards is not a good stat line, especially for a quarterback who uses his legs very often. So I really felt that he underperformed, and Notre Dame is facing some scary hours if they don't turn it around. And I know they're not going to forget about this game that had just happened this past Saturday. This is going to carry with them, and hopefully it's more of a chip on the shoulder instead of a deflating loss, because they can still make the playoff if they go undefeated. That's probably the most likely outcome if they were to go undefeated. But it's going to be interesting to see how Riley Leonard reacts to this game and if he can correct it. And then my second quarterback for stock down, Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado. He disgusted me this weekend. I'm not gonna lie. As a fan, as a fan of an NFL team that's gonna be picking high as well. The stats weren't bad. 23 for 38, 244 yards, a touchdown and a pick, and of course a loss 28-10 at the hands of Nebraska, as Andrew just mentioned previously. But he left the game with 2 minutes left. He wasn't suspended. He wasn't ejected. He wasn't injured. He just decided, okay, I'm done watching this. I'm gonna walk in. If you can sit there and tell me with a straight face that that would happen on any team where his father isn't the head coach, I would laugh in your face. That it's only because Deion Sanders is the head coach of Colorado. He would not be able to do that at any other big program in the country. And he's acting like a diva because he has that freedom that Deion provides for his sons. Even in Pee Wee football, no one wants to play with the kid that acts like a brat and his father lets him act that way on the field, in the game, what have you. And it doesn't matter at what level, and especially not at this one. And then in the press conference after the game, he hints at the fact that Colorado's O-line is terrible, which is something you just don't say. You don't say that. He said, how many times did Dylan Raiola get hit? It doesn't matter. It doesn't. You're on Colorado. You're not on Nebraska. And not only is that a shot at the O line, but that's also a shot at Colorado's D line, who wasn't getting any pressure on Raiola. But that is just a classless way to go about it. It's week two. Like, you got to be with these guys for the next 10 to 11 to 12 weeks playing these games. And you're telling me that's the kind of answer that's going to get them to block harder for you? I doubt that. That's also scary in terms of his NFL kind of draft. That is not an answer of an NFL QB. And even if it was the O-line's fault, you still reflect it back on yourself. That's what quarterbacks do. That's kind of the pain that comes with being a quarterback, is that you get the brunt of the criticism. And he's got to take that on. He's got to show some leadership. If you're going to be a captain or whatever he has on his jersey, I forget if it's an L or it might be an L for leader, the way that Dion does it. You got to act like one, and he really didn't, and that disappointed me. So Riley Leonard for his performance, Shedeur Sanders with his off the field antics were two big issues for me, and that's why they are my stock downs of week two. So Andrew, who you got for your stock downs?
Yeah, my first stock down, I also went with a quarterback. I went with Cade McNamara for Iowa. There was all this offseason talk about Iowa's offense from last year being terrible. We all know that they couldn't move the ball. They get Ferentz out at offensive coordinator. Obviously, Kirk Ferentz is still the head coach, but his
Has
son,
been forever.
yeah, his son gets fired as offensive coordinator. They bring a new guy in, and in their first game they score 40. People thinking, okay, this Iowa offense is back. You go into the Cyhawk game, which in Iowa, I mean, I have family from Iowa, so it's been talked about my entire life. You have to win the Cyhawk game. Iowa State, what a rivalry it is. You don't expect bad performances when you're playing Cyhawk. You have to win. And Cade McNamara did not show up at all. He went 13 for 29 for 99 total yards and two interceptions, no
Oh,
touchdown passes. And it was a game winning field goal for Iowa State to win the Cyhawk. And, as a top 25 team who is kind of a fringe Big Ten contender this year, you can't afford to lose a game like that. It can be extremely deflating for your season losing a rivalry game. And now, obviously, with a lot of conference realignment, we're seeing some of these rivalry games earlier in the season, but you don't want to lose, the game that's supposed to bring your morale up, the pride of the state. You can't lose that early in the season when you're trying to stay relevant in a very, very competitive conference. And, quarterback's the leader of the offense. And, last year McNamara went down, I think it was week one, maybe week two with an ACL injury. And they had Deacon Hillen, who, he's no longer with the program because of his abilities. But McNamara is supposed to be their guy, came in from Michigan. He's supposed to be the leader. And, he once again proved that Iowa's offense might not be anything again. Really disappointing. Obviously, they dropped out of the top 25. I probably can see them struggling throughout the Big Ten schedule. But yeah, very, very disappointing from McNamara. I expected a lot more out of him. I wanted him to rise up in this rivalry game, and he really didn't. And then I also went with Notre Dame as my biggest droppers. And obviously, you talk about Riley Leonard and some of the stats behind it. But the way I see it, they could have potentially screwed themselves out of making the playoffs with this loss. And yes, it's a 12-team expanded playoff this year, so this loss isn't as negative and impactful as it may have been last year. But the way I look at it, Notre Dame is still an independent. And when you talk about going down to the bulk of it, end of the season, when you're looking at resumes, if let's say they're 11 or 12 and there's some teams on the outside that are playing in conference championships or maybe lost in a conference championship, that might push the other team above them, not having that conference championship. And looking at their schedule, it's not like they have just a cakewalk to end out. They still have games against top ranked teams like Louisville, who's I think they're 16th in the country right now, and USC, who, again, another team looking to compete in the Big Ten this year. If they lose one of the two or both of those, they could potentially be done. You talk about the SEC as one of your biggest risers. There's 5 teams that could potentially take the at-large bids away. And even in the Big Ten, whoever doesn't win the Big Ten could easily take up the bulk of those at-large bids. We could really just see conference champions, the group of 5 champion, and then a hodgepodge of SEC and Big Ten teams as the
yeah.
at-large bids. So when you look at it, a loss against NIU at home is awful for your resume. And especially because you won't have a conference championship that you can rest on at the end of the season. they could potentially have screwed themselves out of making the playoffs if they happen to lose to either Louisville or USC or anyone else on their schedule. And for me, that's a game you have to win. Marcus Freeman knows that. Riley Leonard knows that. You can't lose to a group of five school from the MAC week two and see yourself as a competitor. I mean, there's a reason they dropped so deep in the ranks too. And yeah, to me, Notre Dame really shot themselves in the foot. It's going to be really detrimental. They're going to have to climb their way back up, but they're my biggest stock down in the week.
And it's going to be interesting. They're going to Purdue this weekend. That is not easy. That is a predominant place where ranked teams go to die. So
Yeah.
that is also something. And then later on in the season, you got to travel to Georgia Tech and you host Florida State. I know Florida State's kind of a crapshoot right now, but they're still loaded with talent. So that'll be interesting. That's a good point. I didn't really recognize that even losing a conference championship game could put you above this Notre Dame team. So that'll be interesting for sure.
Yeah, and then we saw it with TCU 2 years ago. They lose to Kansas State in the conference championship. They still got the bump up. So I think looking at resumes from the committee, like you can't punish a team for being in a conference championship, and it could potentially be the reason that Notre Dame gets knocked out.
I do have a question.
Of course.
Historically, obviously, Notre Dame never in a conference. Could you see them joining the Big Ten or the ACC in football? Because they're in the ACC for every other sport.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, I think you have to look back during the COVID season, they played in the ACC. And I understand from the historical and the pride of being an independent program. I get that. And that'll probably be the reason that they never join a conference. But you could potentially be seeing if this happens over the next 3 years, let's just say, just pick 3 years. If it happens over the next 3 years where they lose out on the playoffs because they didn't get in as an at-large because of teams that did better in an actual conference, they might potentially look to move. And with how crazy the realignments were this offseason, I was kind of surprised they didn't try to jump in. I
yeah.
think the ACC is probably the most realistic, which would be really good for the ACC. Trying to build up that top end of your conference right now, it's kind of like, Miami, Florida State some years now, not this year. Clemson, they're kind of on the decline. So you really need to bring in a staple team to be that top of your program or top of your conference. So yeah, I think Notre Dame, if they keep getting screwed over because of this, why wouldn't they join the ACC or any conference that wants them that's a Power Five?
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. In college football 25, when I get to realigning the conferences, Notre Dame goes straight in the Big Ten. I put them straight in the Big Ten. They should have been there from the beginning. But like you said, if they were to join the ACC, that would be huge for the ACC, who could see Florida State and Clemson exit to possibly the Big 12. That's the rumors I've been hearing pretty soon. So they really need Notre Dame. So I honestly wonder on the ACC part of the ACC's part, their commissioner, if they go knock on Notre Dame's door and they're like, please come join us. You need this. So do we. Can we make this happen? So that'll be interesting to see, like you said, 3 years from now, if this happens over and over again. But hopefully it was just a hiccup for Notre Dame fans. They have so much history and tradition that hopefully this doesn't turn into something ugly that we could see it be. All right, so moving on back to shifting gears back to the NFL, we're going to hit you guys with two teams that impressed us and two teams that disappointed us off of their week one performances. First, we're going to start positive. We always like to start positive on this show. So, Andrew, who were the teams that impressed you this weekend?
Yeah, so to start, the first one was the New Orleans Saints. And yes, it was the Carolina Panthers that they played. Carolina did not play a good game at all, but I still thought there were a lot of positives that I took away from watching the Saints. Derek Carr looked really, really strong. Threw for 200 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. The offense moved. Again, yes, this Panthers roster is not very good. We've been talking about it. They're really just not good, to say it candidly. But I still wanted to see if there were struggles against a team like the Panthers. I'm not that high on the Saints this year. I think they're kind of regressing because of age. But to start off week one in a division rivalry game, they really looked strong. And yes, we'll have to see as they play more competitive teams. But to be honest, just kind of a good feeling. I have a buddy who's a Saints fan from home. He was really excited to see. Obviously, he took it with the grain of salt that it was the Panthers, but I think it was a positive first step because if they would have lost week one to the Panthers, very deflating. So I was relatively impressed with them. And then my second team was the Jacksonville Jaguars. Yes, they lost 20-17 on a game-winning field goal as time expired to the Dolphins, but this is again a team that I wasn't very high on. I thought Miami was just going to go at home and just dismantle them. Typical Miami fashion. Tyreek gets thrown the ball, has a crap ton of yards. Jalen Waddle looks good. Devon Achane or Raheem Mostert come in, run all over them. But they really, really impressed me. You know, their defense was able to make Tua look very inconsistent. A lot of shaky decisions out of them. And their offense moved the ball really well. I mean, we're talking about one play that could have changed the outcome of this game. If Travis Etienne doesn't fumble into the end zone for a touchback, that's a different ballgame. They honestly win that game. So, you know, looking at a division that they could try and compete again with Houston and Indianapolis, I really think that the Jaguars looked a lot better than I thought they were going to be. They really impressed me. Again, they lost, but against a team that's going to be really good this year in Miami, a 3-point loss in Miami right at the start of the season when it's still extremely hot. I'm happy with that. Honestly, you want the win, but in terms of losses, that's fine for
That's a
me.
good loss.
I was
Yeah.
pretty impressed. What about you though? What were your two impressing teams this year?
So I'm gonna go a little bit of chalk here, but they still impress me. The first team, San Francisco 49ers, I talked about it on TikTok. They are a totally complete team. In terms of any other team in the NFL, the Niners roster is built beautifully. Kyle Shanahan's really running a tight ship so far. And I think that, like I said in my TikTok, we're not giving the Jets enough credit. That was a good defense and what is going to be a pretty good offense for them. And they really just didn't seem like they were playing the same level there. You know, the Niners were just better. That's simply what it was. The thing that stood out to me, I talked about it also on the TikTok, was the blocking. The willingness of people that are not getting the ball to stick your nose in it and just absolutely pile drive someone. Blocking is the hardest thing to do in sports. I never liked it when I played, but it's something that you got to do. Obviously, you can't get the ball every single play. And I look at guys like Kyle Juszczyk and George Kittle. They do not complain about blocking. In fact, they welcome it. They were amazing. The pulling guards were amazing. You know, we saw a couple rookies, some unnamed guys on that offensive line, obviously anchored by Trent Williams at the left tackle spot. But they were really cohesive. I didn't see many breakdowns. Jordan Mason was able to have the game that he had because of that blocking and his ability to really see the lanes and cut off of that. But it was awesome to watch. The defense can fly. That was never indifferent. I am amazed every time Fred Warner steps onto the field. He just makes plays. You know he's communicating well. The defense is probably never going to break down just because of that. You know, hit that the best linebacker in the NFL, in my opinion, in Fred Warner. But they're hitting hard. They can run any scheme. There's not any like cover three, cover four, cover six, cover two, cover zero, cover one. It didn't matter. They were able to get to their spots and play to the best of their ability and a really cohesive unit, the same as the offense. So the Niners really impressed me, and I expect that at least through the regular season, they're the best team in the NFL. Even with the Chiefs being as good as they kind of looked when they opened the season there on Thursday night against the Ravens. My second team that impressed me was the Detroit Lions. But Tyler, they blew a 17-3 lead in the second half to the Rams. They had to win it in overtime. How could they have impressed you? Guys, I know you're waiting for my answer. I'll tell you right now. It's because of the way they lost the NFC title game last year. They're up 24-7, excuse me, at halftime versus a reeling Niners squad. It looked like, okay, Lions, Chiefs in the Super Bowl. That was the way it was going to be. They were outscored 27-7 the rest of the game and lost in heartbreaking fashion. There were a couple of times where, for example, CJ Gardner-Johnson got a personal foul because he was showing off instead of actually playing when they were up that many points, and it ended up costing them and getting the Niners back into the game. But this time they fought back after blowing a lead. They showed resilience, pounded the rock. They were able to run the ball the entire overtime drive. They didn't have to pass really, and beat a good Rams team despite Matt Stafford having a very good game. Not to mention, he never had a chance to respond in overtime because the Lions drove right down the field running the football and scored the game-winning touchdown. Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra are going to be one of the best 1-2 punches in the league this year, and that's pretty clear. I wasn't sold on Jameson. I knew that he was picking up speed. He was becoming more of a weapon there. But now it's clear after this game where he went off. They're going to be amazing. I worry a little bit for Amon-Ra owners in fantasy because Jameson's going to take a bunch of catches. Don't worry, Andrew. I'm seeing that look too. I got him too. I'm a little nervous. But the point is, the Lions showed resilience. They bounced back. Dan Campbell really knows how to coach. He's a great coach. So for me, the Lions showed that they could overcome that hump of blowing that lead and then coming back and winning. So my two teams that impressed were the Niners and the Lions. So unfortunately, as all things go, we got negatives to the positive side of it. Who disappointed you this weekend the most?
Yeah, for me, number one, Buffalo Bills. I had them in my money line. They did win, so, obviously one of my picks were right. It was a, 34-28 win against Arizona at home. And I'll be honest, Arizona looked better than I think I've given them credit for. They weren't as bad that I thought they would be, but I still was really disappointed in the way Buffalo played. There's a lot of, we always talk about it. There's a lot of changes between last year's Buffalo to now, but there wasn't enough to convince me that they're going to be really competitive this year. Arizona, again, this is a team at home. You should go in and just steamroll them. And, a one touchdown win at home to start the season is concerning. Their secondary was not good. And rookie Marvin Harrison just didn't get targeted, but there were plenty of times where he was wide open. And I really think that a lot of things need to change in Buffalo. Slow offensive start, there's going to be growing pains. I get that. You lose your wide receiver one and your wide receiver two in the offseason. But, Josh Allen also didn't do enough for me to be fully convinced that he's an MVP front runner like every Buffalo fan thinks every year. Yes, he was definitely an MVP candidate last year, don't get me wrong, but this was not a game that convinced me of this week. And yeah, to me, not really a stats thing, but like they couldn't really run the ball that well. James Cook didn't do much. Their receivers weren't really getting open. Dalton Kincaid did nothing. Offensively, they struggled. Defensively, they didn't look great. Overall, I was really disappointed in this team. And yeah, my second most disappointing team this week were the Cleveland Browns. At home, the dog pound. You're playing Dallas, who's a good team. Again, a team I had Dallas winning, so I was right. But Cleveland didn't look good. Just like Buffalo, they didn't look good. Deshaun Watson, he's not the guy. We kind of have that confirmation now that they really wasted their money in that big blockbuster trade. And, this week too, another investigation for his, inappropriate misconduct. I'm saying that for the guidelines so we don't get flagged. But another lawsuit coming out that could potentially derail their season. But even with him, the Browns didn't look good. Jerry Jeudy, Amari Cooper, a lot of talent on that offense didn't really do anything. Jerome Ford got a garbage time touchdown, sure, but they didn't run that well. An unlucky pick in one of the picks that Deshaun threw, but overall, again, they were just kind of there. They were just very flat. And then yes, Dallas is a very good team. Don't get me wrong. They looked pretty good from most of the game. But if you're Cleveland, you have to try to compete in the AFC North. And this was not a game that convinced me that they'll be competitive. But it's disappointing, but it's early, so both of these teams could easily turn it around. But what did you have for your two biggest disappointments of this week?
I'm glad that we didn't have any overlap on this because as we always say, guys, like we don't really check in with each other before the show. We just kind of go into it and surprise each other here with these picks. But oh my God. All right. So my first team is the Atlanta Falcons. They pulled all these moves. They got Kirk Cousins. They've made all these signings. They traded for Matthew Judon. They drafted Michael Penix, but obviously that didn't affect the game. But all that to lose to Chris Boswell? Are you kidding me? And like obviously I know, and Steelers fans don't get mad at me. I know that the defense played great and the offense did just enough. But 6 field goals is really going to beat this team. That at home too. Um, it was disturbing for me to look at that. I really think that the Falcons win this game and then kind of be the front runner for the NFC South. But the Bucks are a much better team based on week one. Obviously, the Steelers I think are better than the Commanders as well. But Kirk Cousins looks stiff. He looked really stiff, and it's really worrying because, an Achilles is not easy to come back from. That is not something that is easy. He didn't plant on his throws very well. You could tell that he was stepping kind of softly, didn't get enough power onto it. And he was more immobile than he usually is, which is not a good sign. That's what I kind of pointed at here when I was even watching the game. Was that like, did his Achilles injury really like push him off the cliff? Like, is he not as good as is he ever going to return to what Kirk Cousins usually looks like? Obviously, it's week one, we're overreacting, but that's our job in sports media is to overreact and blow it up so that you guys, you listeners out there, can enjoy. But it was really worrying. Kirk Cousins really worried me. I would not be surprised if he continues this, that Michael Penix sees time, even though they did sign him that massive contract. Obviously, we've seen in the past with my team, the Giants and the Browns, is giving a quarterback a lot of money is not always something that it turns out or pans out well for the team. So you drafted that guy for a reason, that high for that reason, and he's looked good in camp. He looked good in preseason. So I would be interested to see if Penix kind of gets that way. The reason why I'm not panicking for them, they disappointed me, but I'm not panicking, is because they do get to play the Panthers twice. The Saints looked amazing, as you said. You pointed them out. So we'll see what happens there. But even the Bucks aren't like that great of a team where I can just straight away go, okay, they're winning this division from that. And the most disappointing part about it, and the reason why I would be pissed off if I was on that Falcons defense, was that the defense played well enough to win that game. But I still even expected a little bit more from them. They let the Steelers drive a lot to get into field goal range. Yes, they made the stop, but that's still giving up points. And obviously, if your offense scores 10 points, you're probably not going to win the game in the NFL. But still, that's something, you got to force less points than your offense scores to win the game. So that's where I had a bit of, low expectations, or they failed my expectations a little bit for what they had. My second team, here's my rant time. New York Giants. My 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 hopes were so low. They were so low. I didn't think they could be any lower. We come out, it's the Vikings. Sam Darnold's playing. I'm thinking, okay, we got a chance. It's a pick 'em in the betting. Everyone's betting on the Vikings. Malik Neighbors' first game. Every single Giants Hall of Famer that's alive was at that game, and they were all embarrassed. Carl Banks, a Hall of Fame linebacker for the Giants, talked about a story from Lawrence Taylor. Lawrence Taylor whispers in his ear, 22 of us could go out there. By the way, they're all over 50 years old and play better than that Giants team did today. And you know what? They're not wrong. That's the worst part. I'm not even going to talk about Daniel Jones. He's got enough flack. He looked lost. The pass rush was pathetic. Kayvon Thibodeau does not have a single move in his arsenal. I didn't know that, but apparently got locked up, didn't even get close. Dexter Lawrence, amazing as always, but he can't do it by himself. And Brian Burns, I thought you were supposed to be a Pro Bowler. Looked horrible. The secondary was going to be bad. I already knew that. But the pass rush was the thing that surprised me. Also, some questionable playing time issues. Isaiah Simmons did not see a snap in the entire game, which is unbelievable to me. And Jalen Hyatt played 3 offensive snaps. A guy that has done nothing but make plays for us. Last year, he didn't get the ball. He barely played. And in college, he was amazing. You got to bring that in. If Daniel Jones, I've watched 6 years of Daniel Jones. This is my 6th year. The only thing that he is good at, besides scrambling time to time, is throwing the deep ball. Jalen Hyatt is our best deep ball wide receiver. He should be out there every single play. So it's just inexcusable. Brian Daboll was calling the game like he wanted to lose. It was really just bad. There was no positives besides maybe the offensive line only giving up. I think PFF had it as they only gave up 2 of the 5 sacks. The other 3 sacks were on Daniel Jones scrambling into them. But that's the one positive. But this Giants team, it is going to be a horrible year. And I think I'm going to be seeing a lot of the Red Zone channel on Sunday. I don't think I'm going to be able to watch an entire Giants game, but I really wanted to rip down this flag after watching that game on Sunday. But I held it off because, I'm a true fan and that's just part of fandom. But yeah, the Giants are terrible. They're going to be in the top 3 picks this year without a doubt in my mind. So that's my Giants rant. I could go on forever, but I don't want to torture you guys because this isn't a Giants podcast. But yeah, so the Falcons disappointed me and the New York Football Giants just pitiful effort on Sunday.
Yeah, it was rough to watch. And hey, you talked about it with Red Zone. I'm already a Red Zone watcher because we don't get the West Coast games.
Yeah.
It's it's going to be a long season for the both of us if we're being completely
Yeah.
honest. And we both could be tanking for Quinn Ewers this season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a good chance of that. And if we talk about like that Giants Panthers game in Germany, I feel so bad for the German fans that they're gonna have to watch that. I'm not gonna make the joke that I've seen because that's inappropriate, but that game is going to be one of the worst football games to ever be televised at any level. It's just so bad.
Yeah.
But there's nothing positive there too much there. So I mean, unless you have any other thoughts, I think all
We're
right.
both we're
So
both as miserable as can be, so I think that's a good time. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's a good way to end it off here. So this has been an episode of Sideline Signal. Check in back with us later this week for our predictions going into the next week of NFL as well as college football. For Andrew, I am Tyler signing off. Please remember to subscribe on YouTube, like the videos, comment. We'll respond as well as our page on TikTok at Sideline Signal. We'll be very active. We want to know your opinions. So thank you guys so much for listening and tune in next time.